All right, so I want to do something, have a little fun with this reading here that I'm going to be reading from Conversations with Žižek, which is an excellent book. I'm going to be reading from Conversation 3, entitled Subjects of Modernity, Virtuality, and the Fragility of the Real. And I want to, and here Žižek is going to be giving a Lacanian understanding of human subjectivity and the tensions that are therein. I want to read this in light of the idea of Genesis and the fall of man, because my idea here is that with all the sophisticated psychoanalytic language ideas and concepts that are put forth in postmodernity, they are, it seems to be a recapitulation of the consequences of the fall found in Genesis. No matter how much they try to efface and ridicule and disregard the superstitious idea that instantiated Western metaphysics, they can't seem to get out of this attractor, and they can't seem to understand why they are always looking at subjectivity or human identity in this negative sense. So terms that are going to be introduced here are subjectivity, which is, human identity essentially. And Žižek understands human subjectivity characterized as radical negativity. So he puts forth Lacan's concept of the real as this negative absence or void that is at the center of human subjectivity. And I'd like to couch this in the idea of the fall. So what happened in Genesis when Adam and Eve transgressed God's one commandment? So Adam and Eve, we can think of them as obviously individuals, but they also represent humanity as a whole. In fact, the term Adam in Hebrew means humanity, and the term Eve in Hebrew means life. So the story in the Garden of Eden is that Adam and Eve were spiritual children who were eventually going to inherit the kingdom. Once they matured and developed spiritual discernment, they were going to even eat from the fruit of the knowledge of the tree of the knowledge of evil. That was their dispensation, but they did not follow the commandment. So what happened was they were tempted by the subtle serpent to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And when they did, they were thrust into a simulated world. They were in reality, the real reality, you could say the base reality, communing with God. And then they were thrust into the fallen world, the simulation. I'm going to think of this world, our fallen world, as the symbolic order, as Lacan understands it. And human subjectivity, which was whole and in communion with God, became this negation, became the real. The kernel of the real is human subjectivity post-fall. So I'm going to read here and keep these ideas in mind as we read through some of these concepts. So this is in a conversation form. Glenn Daly is asking this question here. You have consistently emphasized the persistence of the subject as a dimension of radical negativity for all being. The typical postmodern attitude, however, is characterized by a fierce resistance to the notion of the subject. What do you think is behind this resistance? Žižek responds, the answer to your question in direct and vulgar terms, because the subject is the real, and every resistance ultimately is the resistance to the real. The critics who believe that we should overcome subjectivity are engaged in a pseudo-struggle against a limited notion of the subject, like the self-transparent Cartesian subject. However, they are implicitly aware of what a subject stands for, radical negativity, the dimension of death drive, and so on, and that this is what is truly at stake. Death drive is a Freudian concept that was reappropriated by Lacan, and it's characterized by this excess, this compulsion to repeat, a neurotic repetition that is something that can't be kind of appropriated by the subject, who continuously repeats and expresses his neurosis, in a sense, towards death. But if we look at this in terms of Genesis, right? So we are in a fallen world, and we are under the powers and principalities of the demonic entities, Satan himself, who Satan it cannot create anything. All he can do is manipulate and twist reality. And that is what happens, I'm putting forth here, in the psyche of humanity since the fall. Humans are constantly looking to be satisfied. They're constantly looking for their desires to be quenched, and that can never be accomplished because we live in a world, a symbolic world, a simulation, where there's this idea of a paradise lost. And I'm going to understand this when Žižek talks about here the absence or the void that instantiates the radical negative character of human existence as this loss of a paradise that never was. So I'm going to read a little bit more here. There is almost a hysterical structure here, in the sense that the resistance is towards the constitutive intermediate dimension of the real, which is neither nature nor culture, but the gap as such, the point of primordial madness, primordial foreclosure. Again, here, these terms reflect back to the fall of man, right? This primordial madness, the primordial foreclosure, when man was foreclosed from the Garden of Eden, from paradise, because of the transgression. The transgression you can think of in a sense of instantiating human desire, mimetic desire in Girardian terms, that is constantly imitating a model in attempts to obtain the object. But this imitation is mediated by the model, and the model eventually it goes from that of admiration to that of the stumbling block, the scandalon, and this double bind that is instantiated by the desire from wanting to eat and know and engage with the knowledge of good and evil prior to spiritual discernment. The result of that is existence in a fallen world. So getting rid of the subject means attempting to get rid of this disturbing excess, which is nonetheless a transcendental condition of culture, a kind of malfunction which acts as a necessary vanishing mediator between nature and culture. The questioner again, some of the resistance at least is directed specifically at the psychoanalytic view of the sexuation of the subject. Why is the male-female distinction considered to be a primary real antagonism? Is it different to the other forms of antagonism? So I'm actually going to skip a little bit. I wanted to stick with Lacan here. He gets into Deleuze, and I want to stick with the concepts, Lacan's concepts here. So here we go. So your analysis, the questioner, your analysis of contemporary forms of subjectivity is frequently linked with the Lacanian concept of the object petit a, small object A. Can you elaborate on the functioning of this elusive object? One of the popular chocolate, here Žižek responds, one of the popular chocolate products on sale all around Central Europe is the so-called Kinder, an empty eggshell made of chocolate and wrapped up in lively colored paper. Having unwrapped the egg and cracked open the chocolate shell, one finds in it a small plastic toy, or small parts from which a toy can be put together. Is this toy not the le object petit a at its purest? The small object filling in the central gap, the hidden treasure, agalma in the center. The child who buys this chocolate egg often nervously unwraps it and just breaks the chocolate, not bothering to eat it, worrying only about the toy. Is such a chocolate lover not a perfect case of Lacan's motto, I love you, quote, I love you, but inexplicably, I love something in you more than yourself, and therefore I destroy you. Let's look at this sentence again. Let's break it down a bit and see how we can refer it back to the consequences of the transgression and the instantiation of mimetic desire, which was a consequence of the fall. So Žižek is quoting Lacan here again in deciphering the small object A. So Lacan's motto, quote, I love you, but inexplicably, I love something in you more than yourself, and therefore I destroy you. What is this in you more than yourself that I love that makes me want to destroy you? That is your desire, because desire, mimetic desire, is always the desire of the other's desire. So the love, which is again a dispensation given to humanity by God, has been corrupted and it's been twisted by this kind of double bind of mimetic desire, where the model, the mediator, eventually becomes the obstacle. That which in you that I love, eventually, because of mimetic rivalry, becomes that which in you I hate and want to destroy. That's a central tenet and theme found in Girard with regards to his mimetic desire, but it's also a consequence of being a member of a civilization that has fallen and that has developed so many sophisticated conceptual frameworks to deny and release from this idea of being fallen, that it's interesting how we keep theories always keep coming back to the central point of being in a fallen world here. So we'll keep going here. This material, real, void in the center, of course, stands for the structural formal gap on account of which no product is, quote, really that, unquote. No product lives up to the expectation it arouses. In other words, the small plastic toy is simply different from chocolate. Is not simply different from chocolate, the product we bought. While materially different, it fills in the gap in chocolate itself, i.e., it is on the same surface as the chocolate. I'm going to skip down a little bit here because Žižek gives a kind of vulgar example here that I don't want to go through. So he says, and this egg provides the formula for all the products which promise more. Buy a DVD player and get 5 DVDs for free, or in an even more direct form, more of the same. Buy this toothpaste and get 1/3 more for free. Not to mention the standard trick with the Coke bottle. Look on the inside of the metal cover and you may find that you are the winner of one of the prizes, from another free Coke to a brand new car. The function of this more is to fill in the lack of a less to compensate for the fact that by definition, a merchandise never delivers on its phantasmatic promise. In other words, the ultimate true merchandise would be the one that would not need any supplement, the one that would simply fully deliver what it promises. Quote, you get what you paid for, neither less nor more, end quote. No wonder then that these eggs are now prohibited in the USA and have to be smuggled in from Canada and sold at 3 times the price. Behind the official pretext, they solicit you to buy another object, not the one publicized. It is easy to discern the deeper reason. These eggs display too openly the inherent structure of a commodity. Let's spend a little bit of time here and break down what is a commodity. A commodity is a perfect empty vessel for the expression of mimetic desire and mimetic rivalry. Doesn't matter what the commodity is. What matters is the desire it instantiates in the other, which makes it attractive and intensifies rivalry. So it's not important what the commodity is. It's important that the commodity in capitalism, and I don't think the commodity is new in a sense. It's just the newest form of an attractor of desire, which again was instantiated during the fall, right? The fruit of the knowledge of good and evil was a beautiful, desirable fruit that tempted Adam and Eve, and they gave into their temptation because they weren't, again, spiritually mature. They didn't have the discernment yet. So the commodity is the fruit. The commodity is the fruit that humanity continues to try to find the lost paradise that were the tree of the knowledge of good and evil actually existed, which was supposed to be the inheritance of Adam and Eve, because you remember they were supposed to have access to not only the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but also the tree of life. So questioner says, in terms of the commodity, this being a typically Lacanian structure without positive content, but which revolves around an infinitely translatable void. An infinitely translatable void. What does that mean? These are, again, signifiers. These are words that are trapped in the attractor of the deceiver, of the subtle serpent, of the engine of history of the fallen world, right? So no positive content without positive content, but which revolves around an infinitely translatable void. This void is at the center of every human heart. This void is at the center of human identity. This void is what is constantly being understood and appropriated and reappropriated in postmodernity from existentialism on upwards through structuralism and post-structuralism. So the void is a infinitely translatable void. So here Žižek responds here. Yes, and is there not a clear structural homology between this structure of the commodity and the structure of the bourgeois subject? Do subjects, precisely insofar as they are the subjects of universal human rights, also not function as these Kinder chocolate eggs? Would the humanist universalist reply to the Tete Negra not be precisely something like the Kinder egg? As humanist ideologists would have put it, we may be indefinitely different. Some of us are black, others white. Some tall, others small. Some women, others men. Some rich, others poor, etc. Yet deep inside us, there is the same moral equivalent of the plastic toy. The same je ne sais quoi, an elusive X, which somehow accounts for the dignity shared by all humans. So moving a little further here in the text. So let us return to the scene of a small child violently tearing apart and discarding the chocolate egg in order to get to the plastic toy. Is he not the emblem of so-called totalitarianism, which also wants to get rid of the inessential historical contingent coding in order to liberate the essence of man? Is not the ultimate totalitarian vision that of a new man arising out of the debris of a violent annihilation of the old corrupted humanity? Paradoxically, then, liberalism and totalitarianism share the belief in factor X, the plastic toy in the midst of the human chocolate coating. All right, let's end here by breaking down this paragraph a little bit here. So Žižek says here, the understanding, let's look at the small child violently tearing apart and discarding the chocolate egg in order to get at the plastic's toy. We can think of that in contemporary terms as constantly desiring one thing after the other, and once achieving that desire, being absolutely not fulfilled and finding something else to desire. And remember, in mimetic terms, desire is always the desire of the other. So what the other desires is the secret desire of the self, of the subject. But this is not obviously in the consciousness of the subject. This is not in the awareness of the subject. The subject is under the impression that just this next desire, whether it's this next car or the new house or the new job or the new relationship, that is what will finally satisfy the obsession, the increasing desire. So the small child tearing apart and discarding the chocolate egg in order to get at the plastic toy. Now, Žižek brings this in terms of both totalitarianism and liberalism. He says, is he not, the small child, the emblem of so-called totalitarianism, which also wants to get rid of the inessential historical contingent coding in order to liberate the essence of man? That's a hell of a sentence. Is he not the emblem of so-called totalitarianism, which also wants to get rid of the inessential historical contingent coding in order to liberate the essence of man? Is not the ultimate totalitarian vision of a new man arising out of the debris of the violent annihilation of the old corrupted humanity? This makes me think of what's happening now and what is a result of the hyper-critical humanities with regards to Western metaphysics and Western culture as a whole, is this attempt to build the new man arising out of the debris of the violent annihilation of the old corrupted humanity. The corrupted humanity has not become overcome because humanity is under the sway of the deceiver. The deceiver just twists again and manipulates, especially in terms of compassion and in terms of the ideas of victimhood are manipulated and twisted. And the idea is that if we burn down reality as we know it today, and out of the debris of the violent annihilation will come this new man, which we've seen in the 20th century has led to disasters one after the other. And you can bet that this would lead to a disaster on a whole higher level as we are becoming more intertwined and converging with technologies, that this idea of just totally burning down our culture and our history without really putting forth a positive viewpoint, even ostensibly, is this same idea of the child violently tearing apart and discarding the chocolate egg, which is Western culture, in order to get to the plastic toy, the new man. But the idea is we cannot, as a collective and as a human race that is fallen, again, we'll bring it back here to Genesis, our original sin is this void that is at the center of the human heart, is at the center of mimetic desire, which eventually always leads to violence, unless, of course, there is the scapegoat mechanism, which has been usurped by Christ, so that the option that we have here in the end of the world from a revelatory and a revelation perspective is to overcome the sin at the center of the human heart. That's not, what are we aiming to as a people? We've absolutely ridiculed the idea of a sin or original sin. We've absolutely discarded the roots of our Christian inheritance in the idea that we're going to use technology technology as a form of salvation, which is essentially the Antichrist, right? So is not the ultimate totalitarian vision that of a new man arising out of the debris of the violent annihilation of the old corrupted humanity? And then paradoxically, he says, then liberalism and totalitarianism share the belief in factor X. That is the belief that desire will be fulfilled. This mimetic desire and this mimetic rivalry will eventually lead to a utopia, to heaven on earth. Well, we can't use heaven on earth. How about we use communism, right? The overcoming of capital. The factor X for Karl Marx was the economic material playing out of history, which would eventually lead from capitalism to socialism to communism. The factor X for is the plastic toy in the midst of the human chocolate coating. This factor X. All right, so we'll leave it there. Thanks for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed this little kind of thought experiment of reading through Žižek and through some of these postmodern concepts, Lacanian concepts, and doing the anathema, what would be an anathema to really postmodernism, and bringing them back to what I claim is their roots in Christian ontology, in Genesis, and in the fall of man. We are in a precarious position right now in 2020 here, and I think that the solutions that will lead to us moving forward in some kind of sane way are so beyond the pale of most people that are thinking and working and coping with these ideas that I don't know. I'd like to hear from you guys. If you guys have watched this far, then first, thank you. And please share some ideas of a pathway forward, of a way to not continually be the small child violently tearing apart and discarding the chocolate egg in order to get to the never satisfying plastic toy. Again, thanks for listening.